Viewing these things throughout the years as our younger generation continues to grow. We want to make sure that we equip them with a foundation of their faith and let them know that we are not believing in a blind faith, but there are evidences that prove why we believe what we believe and why we practice and worship the way we do. But tonight we're going to continue in this series of apologetics. We're going to talk about the moral argument. We're going to talk about the difference between right and wrong and the different stances and ideologies that some people have on this idea of universal morality. I'm going to throw a few dates out in front of you. December the 7th, 1941. The younger generation may not know what that is unless you're a history buff, but December the 7th, 1941 was the day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It's a day that the president said will live in infamy. It's a day that we still talk about, we still remember every December the 7th. November the 22nd, 1963. There are those in this audience who remember exactly where they were at and what they were doing on November the 22nd, 1963. Many of them even remember the details of that day and of that particular time. They can tell you what they were wearing, tell you who they were with, what they were involved in. This was the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. September the 11th, 2001. Now it's in my generation. I can tell you precisely where I was at. I was halfway around the world in the country of Kosovo. I just got back from running a mission that morning. When I got back, I noticed that the base was a little bit more busy and a little bit more tense than normal. I noticed that everybody's faces were carrying a different look about them. I entered into the office and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "We're on high alert. We're up armored 24/7 now. We were a little bit lax. As long as you was on the base, you were allowed to wear your soft cap and not have your flak vest and the hard hat on. But from that day and from that moment on, for the rest of that year, we were up armored all the time." September 11th, 2001 was the day that the terrorists took down the Twin Towers. A day I will never forget, a day many of you who lived through that will never forget. What I'm describing to you is known as flashpoint and or flash bulb memories. These are things that for whatever reason, you don't even have to try to remember. They have been burnt into your mind. You know exactly what took place. And you will carry that memory with you for the rest of your life. So I ask the question, why are these events flashpoint or flashbulb memories? What about these events that made them imprint on our minds that we can remember them decades later? And we can remember them with finite detail. So you see, it's because of the unjustifiable outpouring of wickedness. The immoral actions that took place were so grotesque that we don't even have to try to remember what happened. Each one of these actions violated what is known as the universal objective law of morality. The universal objective law of morality, that's what I'm here to talk to you about this evening. That's this idea of the moral argument. What's right and what's wrong. Such evil in the world provides evidence for the existence of God. Let me restate that. The evil that we just talked about, December the 7th, Pearl Harbor, November 1963, Kennedy being assassinated, September 11th, the atrocities of mankind. Those evils provide evidence that God exists. Now let me explain, it's not that God has any hand in evil deeds. By no means is that what I'm saying. For God does not and he cannot sin. According to James 1:13, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So this fact that this evil exists in the world, providing evidence that God exists, not because God had a hand in that evil, but in order for such evil to be wrong, there must be a universal objective standard that describes what is right. There must be some type of standard that we compare the wrongs of this world to so we can know that they are wrong. Otherwise, how do you know that they're wrong? That, in essence, is the argument that we're going to make tonight. We're going to talk about the moral argument. Again, we're going to use a syllogism. That is, making two arguments, proving the one, and then the one, after you prove it, proves the other one. A real elementary example of a syllogism: I stand before you, a middle-aged bald man. Bald is beautiful. So therefore, I'm a beautiful middle-aged bald man. And then I would go into the evidences of being able to show to you that God created some heads. He created some perfect heads, and then he covered the rest of them with hair. And you see my gist. That's elementary, that's a joke, but that's what a syllogism is. That's what we're doing in these arguments. The major premise of the moral argument: if God does not exist, then objective morality, objective moral values don't exist. So if you have no God, you have no objective moral values. The minor premise is objective moral values do exist. So therefore, God must exist. That's the argument that I want to make to you. That's the argument I hope to prove to you this evening. The case I want to make is quite compelling. Without God, there is no morality in the world. That's the bottom line. Without God, there is no morality. God is the ruler by which humanity measures right from wrong. For you see, if I asked you to go cut me a piece of wood, X inches or X feet so long, one of the first things you're going to have two tools. One of the first tools that you're going to have to grab is some type of measurement device. A tape measure, a ruler, some way or another to give me precisely the length of the board that I want cut. And then, of course, you'll have to have some type of cutting utensil, blade, saw, whatever. But if you're going to be able to give me a board so long, you've got to have some way to measure it. God is the ruler in which humanity measures morality. Regardless of society, regardless of the nationality, regardless of the era of time, there exists an overwhelming sense of right and wrong. There always has, and there always been, or there always will be. Morality is in fact a universal scope, meaning that morality has existed in every culture since the beginning of time. Morality has always existed. Here's a quote that I want to give you. I tried to go back and find who to give credit to, and I could not find this in my notes exactly, so I apologize for that. But I found this when I put this together several years ago. We find a sense of morality in every society around the world, from the most primitive to the most advanced. We find it in the records of all past cultures as well as in all present cultures. And the morality of all these societies is surprisingly similar. No matter how widely separated by time, geography, or cultural development, or religious belief, the morality defined in the Jewish Ten Commandments, the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, the Chinese Tao, the Christian New Testament, they differ in detail, in emphasis, but not in essence. So what this quote is stating, you go look through history, and you go look through different governments, you go look through different empires for different rulers, kings and Caesars and so on and so forth. You go look through different religions that may be running those worlds. There's this universal baseline code of morality that has always existed. All culture, despite their locale, despite their technologies or practices, still respect a universal law of morality, a sense of right and wrong transcending time. It has served as a guide for all humanity since the beginning of time. Humans may not always obey this law, but despite our violations or simple disregard of it, it does not change the fact that this moral law has existed. We can see it in our own nation's history. We can see it as the founding fathers wrote this nation's founding documents. In the Declaration of Independence, we read, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with a certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This idea of objective moral law, what's right and what's wrong, and what men are entitled to, was founded even in our own nation's history. And you have this idea that I hope to debunk tonight, that I'm making this argument against, is this idea of moral relativism. Moral relativism is the view that ethical standards, the view that morality and the position of right and wrong are culturally based and therefore subject to a person's individual's choice. Meaning that we can all decide what is right for ourselves. You decide what's right for you, and I'll decide what's right for me. Moral relativism says it's true for me if I believe it. So this idea, this thought, this concept, the ideology of moral relativism says that if I feel like it is right for me to have multiple wives, then who are you to tell me that it's wrong? If I feel like it is right to commit adultery, then who are you to tell me it's wrong? If I feel like that it's right for me and for my circumstances and for my situation in life to take the life of an unborn child, then who are you to tell me that it's wrong? This idea of moral relativism means I get to decide what's right in my life. And you don't get the right to tell me that it's not. And therefore, you also have the right to decide what's right for your life, and I can't tell you that it's wrong. That's this idea of moral relativism. Even if a person believes in and lives by moral relativism, when they are personally wronged, they quickly appeal to a universal objective law. I have always found it ironic that those who stand on this ground of moral relativism, those who said, I get to choose what's right for me in my life, you don't get a say-so in it until, that is, I've been wronged. Some executive was successful in embezzling money and stole my life savings. Well, that was wrong. If you're going to spend your life standing on this premise of you get to choose your own right and wrong, how do you say that this man was wrong for stealing your livelihood? But they always refer back to, they always point back. Once they've been wrong, now they want to proclaim that somebody did them wrong. Some argue that since humans fall short to always obey the standard, that there is no standard. That's another argument that agnostics and atheists will make. It says, since the beginning of time, humankind has never been able to hold up to a standard, so obviously there is no standard. C.S. Lewis, a great author that I've often loved to read, he states, now C.S. Lewis was an atheist. He was a staunch atheist. He was an atheist who set forth to solidify his ideologies and his standpoint. And he set forth to disprove God and disprove Christianity. And in so doing, time over time, he converted to Christianity. But C.S. Lewis states, my arguments against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got to this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe when I called it unjust? So C.S. Lewis was saying there can't be no God because of all the evil and all the unjustness taking place in the world. And then he finally realized that, what am I basing that on? What am I comparing that to? He's a very well-educated man. I love, he said, how can you call a line crooked unless you know what a straight line is? That's the gist of this moral argument. The moral law is not always the standard by which we treat others, but it's nearly always the standard by which we expect others to treat us. It does not describe how we actually behave, but rather it describes how we ought to behave. Frank Turek in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an atheist. How we treat others. One can know the difference in right and wrong, yet failing to always choose the right does not change the absolute nature of right and wrong. Well, you see, there is an objective moral law. Right and wrong does exist. Now, your choice and your decision to disobey and disregard what is right does not, in fact, change the fact that there is a right and wrong. Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 38. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks you, and from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do unto you, you also do to them likewise. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Continuing on. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. But love your enemies. Do good and lend, hoping for nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the unthankful and evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. How we treat others, the way that we want to be treated. The golden rule. Treat others the way that you want to be treated. Jesus set forth the principle, a universal truth on how we should treat others. Luke 6 and 31, and just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. Luke 6 and 38, for with the same measure you will be used, that you use, it will be measured back to you. I pose this question, what or who is the basis of the universal morality? If universal moral law maintains that certain things are wrong, what is the standard by which we know they are wrong? And the argument that I make to you tonight is God is in fact that standard. His nature is the standard. His word that we read and that we study is the standard of universal moral law. If an objective, Joshua McDowell, a creationist, if an objective standard of truth and morality exists, it cannot be cannot be the product of the human mind, or it will not be objective. It must be the product of another mind. If a constant and unchanging truth exists, it must reach beyond human timelines, or it would not be constant. It must be eternal. If a universal rule of right and wrong exists, it must transcend individual experiences, or will not be universal. It must be above all of us, yet absolute truth must be something or someone that is common to all humanity and to all creation. Now, if you remember in our cosmological argument, and we talked about the cause of that first effect, had to transcend time. He had to be eternal. He had to be all-powerful. He had to be non-material, spirit, outside the physical realm. And here in this argument, we're saying, again, it has to be an all-knowing mind. All-wise, all-knowing, for it to be objective. It has to be, again, eternal. It has to transcend time, it has to transcend space from all beginning of time. Again, this argument stating that God is that standard. God meets those characteristics. Since universal morality must be objective, unchanging, and universal, it requires someone who possesses these characteristics. God and only God is that someone who possesses, who checks all those boxes. God is the only one, and his characteristics can check these boxes. God is the standard of universal morality. Not only did God set the standard, he created humans with the capacity to recognize the standard. So God is the standard. He's the measuring rod by which we check ourselves and we check society around us and we check the things in our lives of the difference between right and wrong. He also implanted within us, his creation, the ability to recognize this universal moral code. Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Going back to the beginning, going back to creation. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So in the beginning, from the first man and the first woman, God created mankind in his image. Therefore, imprinting upon us and in our DNA the ability to recognize this, his objective moral law. We were made in the likeness of God. Because of this truth, we have the ability to recognize the universal moral law that he established. Evil is evil, but not because a person deems it as such, but because it contradicts the nature of God. We know within ourselves when we're doing something wrong. You know, we've often talked about it and have had conversations debating about the fact that you never have to teach a kid how to lie. That's another topic for another day. But what I'm going with this, even though you never had to teach a kid to lie, you also never had to teach a kid to know that it was wrong. From the first time that you did something wrong, you knew that it was wrong. Because you felt it. You felt that you were doing something that you know that you shouldn't have been doing. Where did that come from? If this universal law did not exist, if God did not imprint that upon your mind as a creation, how do you have that feeling the first time that you do something wrong? Now, yes, you can throw in arguments, and I know that they're there, and I would agree with them, that a lot of time we talk about the nurture, and it depends on how you were raised, and certainly there's going to be a big difference with somebody who's never been taught right from wrong in the house and opposed to someone who has. Yes, there's going to be those differences, but within every human mind, in the beginning, as they begin to develop, they know when they're doing something wrong. So I pose to you, how can that be if there's not a universal moral law? Jesus shares with us a very important information about his nature in John chapter 14. Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to me except through the Father. Or no one comes to the Father except through me. John 14:6. All these terms that Jesus used are singular. He says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. He says, there's not another truth. There's not another way. He is the truth. He is the way. He can be such because he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:8. This truth that we're talking about that is imprinted upon us from creation. Direct your attention to Romans chapter 1, verses 16 through 20 to give evidence of that truth that I'm speaking about. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and for also the Greek. For in the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and righteousness of men who suppress the truth of unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifested in them. For God has shown it to them, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and the Godhead, so they are without excuse. So again, we're talking about this universal law of morality. This universal truth that was implanted in our DNA has been a part of us since the first creation. God says in his word in Romans, he said, from the beginning of time, I have made known, I have manifested myself to you. All you got to do is look at creation. Look around about you. See how the world interacts around about you. You can see me. been there since the beginning of time. Romans chapter 2 and verse 12. For as many have sinned without law will also perish without law. And as many have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. So here you go, my emphasis, underlined for you. For when the Gentiles, who do not have the law, by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are a law to themselves, who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. In the day when God will judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ, according to my gospel. Romans chapter 1 says, from the beginning of time, I have made myself manifest to you in nature. Romans chapter 2 says, when Gentiles who did not have a law, they did not live by the Ten Commandments, that was not given to them. They're outside the Jewish belief. He said there were some of these Gentiles who, unknowing, were adhering to the law. How was it that these Gentiles were upholding portions of the law that was never given to them to begin with? Because of this universal law of morality that was put into their hearts and minds from the creation. There is a universal law of morality. There is a universal standard by which we hold what is right and what is wrong, and God is that standard. Humanity is without excuse for not recognizing the universal moral standard that God has established. For since the beginning of creation, God has placed it within man in his creation. When the day of judgment comes and the unrighteousness are lost and condemned, it will not be God's fault. When the day of judgment comes and you stand before the Heavenly Father, and you stand before Him unjustified, you stand before Him unforgiven, you stand before Him condemned to a devil's hell, it will not be God's fault. It's not going to be your mom and daddy's fault. It's not going to be your grandpappy's fault. It's not going to be your wife's or your husband's or your kid's fault. When God looks at you and says, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. I cast you into outer darkness, to the lake which burns with fire and brimstone. I cast you down to hell developed that I made for the devil and his angels. Get away from me. At that moment, you're going to realize you're to blame. You were given ample opportunity. God had made Himself manifested to you from the beginning of time through creation. God has imprinted within you this moral law, universal moral law. You have been in this assembly over and 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 over again and again and again. If you stand before God in judgment and you're condemned to hell, it's your fault. God's given you every opportunity He has. God loved you so much He sent His only begotten so that you would have a way to escape eternal hell and punishment. I pray that none of us hear those words from the Heavenly Father. And I pity the soul who is hearing my voice tonight and chooses tonight to still stay at a guilty distance. Your soul is not something to play with. Eternity is not something to gamble. There will come a day that you're going to stand in judgment. If you stand condemned, it's your fault and yours alone. They willfully made the decision not to retain God in their knowledge. Therefore, it's inexcusable if they choose to make the wrong decisions. Be inexcusable. Peter explains the needs for Christians to be holy in Peter chapter 1 and verse 15. But he who has called you is holy, you also be holy in your conduct, because it is written, be holy for I am holy. The promise of holiness, or the purpose of holiness, is to reflect the nature of God. God's nature is that of holiness, righteousness, goodness, and truth, the fruits of the Spirit. If you are a follower of God, you are producing the fruits of the Spirit. we can see these principles in God's law. His law is a reflection of his nature. It is common to hear that an atheist blamed God for evil and suffering in the world. Again, I find it ironic to hear one claim God does not exist and yet blame him for the evils of society. The fact is, we can call nothing evil, we can call nothing wicked or wrong unless we possess a standard of goodness with which to compare it. God is that standard. Without him, morality would be relative. Morals would not exist without God. David wrote in Psalms, the 53rd chapter, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and have done abominable iniquities. There is none who does good." Not only is this foolish to claim that there is no God, but such a worldview leads to corruption and immorality. Solomon states, as we draw this lesson to a close, Solomon states in Proverbs 16 and 25, "There is a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death." You see, humankind and the philosophers and the highly educated of the world have educated themselves to the point that they feel like they don't need God. Have educated themselves and now are trying to pass it along to any who will sit at their feet and learn from them and say, "I'm smarter than the Bible, I'm smarter than the Creator." They'll dismiss God. If morality were left to man and his way of thinking, then the results would be nothing short of death and destruction. Humanity needs a guide, it needs a standard, it needs a way to which provides direction and purpose, a way that leads to eternal life. And Jesus said, "I am that way. I am that way, I am this truth, and I am this life that we're talking about." God is the moral law which gives us understanding, right from wrong. Without him, there is no way to identify what is evil, and there would be no basis for what is good. So again, I'll restate the universal moral law argument. Universal morality does in fact exist. There is a universal moral law. Since there is a universal moral law, there must be a universal moral law giver, greater than humanity. The only logical explanation for the source of universal objective morality is God. He checks those boxes. His characteristics fulfill the requirements to be able to provide this universal moral law. The moral argument: if God does not exist, then the objective moral laws, moral values do not exist. Objective moral values, in fact, do exist. So the conclusion is God exists, and he is that moral standard. Brothers and sisters, this is the moral argument in a nutshell. This past week, I had an opportunity after my I believe it was last Sunday night, we gave the cosmological argument. Then I listened to a debate online. It was a debate of Kyle Butt and Dr. Schumer. It was held in Montgomery, Alabama, just a few weeks ago. It was one I'd like to attend. I think I even mentioned it in the pulpit, but they had it online and I watched it. And I found it very ironic. Now certainly Kyle Butt did a much better job of explaining it than I did. But Kyle Butt's 20-minute opening presentation was what I presented to you last week as a cosmological argument. Now again, reason it was the same argument because I got all that material from Kyle Butt. But I'm telling you this, or I told you that to tell you what I'm presenting to you is arguments that I have researched and found from people much smarter than myself. And it's stuff that very highly educated men stand toe-to-toe with very highly touted atheists and have debates over and win those debates. I've listened to Kyle Butt debate two atheists, again, very well known. And he held his own. He did much better than holding his own. And he did so with the evidence that I'm presenting to you throughout these studies. This is not fairy tale. This is not make-believe. These are evidences that you can build your faith upon. And knowing that the God that you serve, the God that we preach about and teach about, he is who he says he is. He's accomplished what he said he has accomplished, and he will accomplish the things that he said that he will accomplish. You can rest assured. Again, as I close out this lesson, I ask you the question, are you saved? Are you ready to meet the Heavenly Father? Are you ready to stand before Him in judgment? Are you ready to hear what He has to tell you? Because you're sitting in your seat at this very moment, and you know, you can know, but more likely you do know what He's going to tell you. You know if you're saved and if you're not. If you're not saved, it's your fault. Nobody else's but yours. We extend to you the invitation. If there's one subject to the gospel call, I invite you to come as we stand and as we sing.
Thanks for watching this video. I know what you're thinking. I don't want to miss another video from this channel. In order to avoid that, click on the red button down there, subscribe, and then click the bell icon. Not only will that alert you each time a new video is uploaded to the channel, it will also help spread the channel to other people's awareness. So, go ahead, do it. Like right now, click on it.